Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Book Talk Radio Club. My name is Claire Perkins, and today I'm talking to Timothy Gates. Professionally, Tim has had the pleasure of providing global medical care in a wide variety of settings and to a diverse population of patients. Areas of service have included military medic, I'm getting my tongue twisted there, nurse and paramedic. Tim is definitely a world traveller, and his life and experiences can be found in his wonderful memoir, A Journey. Let's find out more. Hi Tim, welcome, and thank you for coming back on Book Talk Radio Club to talk about A Journey.
Well, hi Claire, and thanks so much for letting me come back.
It's my pleasure. I'd very much like to concentrate in this, your second interview, on your time as providing global medical care. Tell me how you got into that line of work.
Well, it kind of started for me probably in 1980, after I'd been living in a community in the north of Israel for about 14 months. I decided I wanted to come back home and work in the medical field, and specifically in the Army. So I did join the Army and became combat medic, initially with a tank battalion in Germany, and then an infantry battalion here in the States. And then I was invited to kind of an intensive nursing program, which is what I had originally signed up for, and lo and behold, they actually gave it to me. But so I went to that program in Colorado, and just a side note, during that time, so I met my wife, Carol. I was going to school, and actually we met at a little church outside of Denver. But I got out of school, and after a three-day engagement, she was silly enough to marry me. So we were then off to New Jersey, where I worked as a nurse in a little six-bed intensive care cardiac care unit. Then we decided to get out of the Army, and I went to paramedic school and became a paramedic, initially with a private organization, then a hospital-based service, and then a couple fire departments. And while with the fire department, I had applied to volunteer with a medical relief organization that provides care all over the world, and did apply, and it was probably a couple years later I finally heard back from them with an invitation to do some medical relief trips. And yeah, that's how it all kind of started.
So, what training did you take?
Well, I mean, the organization had some programs that I needed to take through them on just disaster medicine, but actually, having been a military medic and then a nurse and then the paramedic for a long time, it was my paramedic certification actually is what they were interested in, and
Right.
why I was able to serve with them.
You've served on medical teams to Kurdistan, Iraq, West Darfur, Sudan, and Band Aceh, Indonesia, and everything in between. What to you was the most memorable and why?
Well, everywhere was so wonderfully memorable. Memorable. Um, just a little bit about each place. Iraq, that was a couple months after the U.S. made its invasion on Iraq and Saddam Hussein. Um, but what really stood out in the trip to me was the incredible history to be found all over Iraq. It really has nothing to do with the trip, but Iraq is, for instance, we would sometimes have to travel through Mosul, which we've all heard about and was in the news a lot. And when we were there, it wasn't a city under siege, but our guide and our contact in the country knew not to spend any time there. He'd get us through. If we drove through, it'd be really fast, and he'd try not to even stop anywhere. So, but Mosul is Nineveh, the Nineveh of the Bible,
Okay.
the big fish Nineveh. So that was pretty cool. And there's all kinds of stuff like that in Iraq. Where Abraham came from, that's in Iraq. The hanging gardens of Babylon, the seven, one of the seven wonders of the world.
Sure.
Even one of the towns we were in, Erbil, there's a sign there. It's supposedly the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. So there's just all kinds of neat history in Iraq. Um, where else? Well, in West Darfur, that was 2004, and at a time when some government-backed Arab nomadic groups, folks called Janjaweed,
Yes.
they were plundering and pillaging and burning some of the non-Arab Africans out of their villages and causing thousands and thousands of displaced people, probably a couple million. So in the midst of all that, I saw some of the most beautiful smiles, honestly, I've ever seen in my life, in the midst of just such a horrible time. So that was very memorable. In Indonesia, and after the tsunami, the first thing that comes to mind is just the crazy devastation.
Well, let's go on to that in a little bit, because there was a question I wanted to ask you about that, actually.
Sure.
But as an American, did you experience much hostility in Iraq, particularly as you said you were only there just shortly after the invasion?
We were in the north, in Iraqi Kurdistan, and primarily in three of the major cities there, Erbil, Soleimani, and Duhok. And this is not that many years after Hussein had, annihilated, I don't know how many thousands of Kurds with chemicals. So Hussein wasn't a big fan in Iraqi Kurdistan. So no, we didn't see hostility from the people we were working with, and keeping in mind that our guide, he was really careful not to bring us around places where there likely would be. So yeah, we just sort of avoided places that might be hostile.
The Boxing Day tsunami is still pretty fresh in many people's minds. You were part of the medical team that was sent to help, weren't you? The tsunami hit many countries. Where were you sent?
We were in the north of Sumatra, in what's called the Aceh region, and we started in their capital city, Banda Aceh, and then hitched a ride on a fishing boat down the west coast a little ways to a town called Lamno, and that was like one of the areas hit the hardest in Sumatra. So I don't know what the population of Lamno initially normally was, but I think they gained about 11,000 displaced people from some of the smaller surrounding villages that were wiped out. So we primarily were working out of Lamno, although did spend a few days in Banda Aceh, the capital, as well.
What are your memories of the scenes you witnessed?
The biggest memory is just devastation like I'd never seen before. I know many, many thousands of people were killed, and we saw just, I don't know, hundreds of bodies. And Banda Aceh was just leveled. It looked like a bomb had gone off. So devastation, but also just wonderful, wonderful gratitude from the people we helped. Is a real, I just remember that above, the devastation even. And gratitude that I felt, because what a privilege to get to be there. And, so, yeah, kind of a mix of devastation and crazy gratitude.
As I've said, you've travelled to many places to help provide medical care and have seen so much human suffering. How have you avoided, if you have of course, suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder?
I would have to think that having been a medic for many years, you see lots of things, and my hope is to just be a help when I can. So, I really can't say that I know what it is to have PTSD. I really don't. But I think there's been a lot of years of work in it. Sometimes disastrous things.
Let's go on to the book now. A journey, an attempt and sometimes struggle at being real in this world. At the beginning of the book, you wrote, around 3 years ago, I started looking at a couple of old journals from the 70s and then one written between 2003 and 2005. And whilst reading them, I developed an overwhelming desire to write a memoir. Why did you want to write a memoir?
It really was kind of a weird thing because I went from not really thinking about writing anything at all to being kind of suddenly driven to work on, putting together this little conglomeration of thoughts and memories, this book. So, and I think probably originally I was thinking it would be nice for Carol and the kids to have something, a record of some thoughts. But as it went on for a couple, 3 years probably writing the thing. But I started thinking how it was such a great opportunity to share some thoughts with friends who I never probably would share these thoughts with otherwise. So now I get to put it in their face in a book. It was very unusual. I didn't expect to ever do something like that.
Why that particular title, and why the sometimes struggle at being real in this world bit?
Well, life has been such a wonderful journey. So the title, that's easy. The subtitle, I think, an attempt and sometimes struggle at being real in this world. It has to do with the fact that trying to actually live out what I say, believe, can really be a struggle. It's not. It doesn't just come naturally. I need lots of supernatural help every day. But if you don't try to live out what you say you believe, I mean, that's kind of a waste of time.
True.
So, yeah.
You grew up in the 60s and 70s, same here. It was a whole different world then, no internet and no mobile phones. But there's such a huge difference, isn't there, for our generation? What are your most vivid memories from your childhood?
I couldn't have asked for a wonderful childhood, really. I had loving parents. I had 3 older brothers who all participated in my life. I could deliver papers for my paper route on our horse, as we had a horse. I could take a ride with Marty the milkman up the old gravel road from our house. Sometimes he'd give me a ride up to the mailbox because it was down the road. So, undeserved, wonderful childhood. I was without doubt a privileged kid. And it was a really simple life, but just a really wonderful life.
Sounds like it. As a young man, you travelled in Europe and the Middle East with a return trip to and 14-month stay in Israel. You stayed on a kibbutz in Israel. Can you explain what life was like on a kibbutz then?
Oh, sure. And I stayed in a few different communities in Israel. Initially, it was 76, 77. I was on a traditional kibbutz, kibbutz Nakshan, which was kind of between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And I think they were originally established by immigrants from Eastern Europe around 1950 or so, and it was after Israel became a state in 1948. So folks were moving to Israel and wanting to make that their homeland, and a lot of kibbutz, I think, were developed then. There were lots of volunteers, young people like me, travelers, folks from all over the world. It was a great place you could work and have a home base to travel in Israel. As a volunteer, they'd bring you on trips sometimes. Just a very, a wonderful opportunity. But then towards the end of that time on Nakshan, another guy and I, Peter, who we later did some traveling together, but we traveled down to the Negev, and we wanted to check out this a community we had heard about where we understood that the rabbi who ran the place was a believer in Jesus, or Yeshua, which is kind of an unusual thing. And we also heard that if Sandy, his name is Sandy, Rabbi Simchat Perlmutter, I believe. If he liked you, it would be possible to volunteer with them and participate with them, making the desert blossom as the rose. I mean, it's as prophesied in Isaiah. I think it's Isaiah 35. It says the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad, and the desert shall blossom as the rose.
Absolutely.
So that's what they were down there doing. But except it was a tomato farm, so we got to, make the desert blossom like the tomato. We worked there for a few months. Very interesting. He had 2 significant others, and it was a very unique place for sure. But then I went back to Israel in 1979 and spent about 14 months in another really unique community. It was up in the north, and it was Europeans. I think they started it like 1963 or so, but it was some Europeans who'd come who had experienced the Holocaust firsthand and wanted to show solidarity to Israel. So they were believers, they were Christians. So I kind of just knocked on their door. I'd heard about this place. Actually, my mother had cut out an article from a newspaper and showed it to me. And I had gone through lots of changes in my head and heart since the last time I'd been in Israel, and just kind of went and knocked on their door and asked if I could stay. And I ended up in their work-study program and spent about 14 months. Just a wonderful time.
You say through it all, good times and bad, smart decisions and some not so very clever, there's always been the undeniable realization that the creator of the universe, the Lord of heaven and earth, was right there with me and actually cared about the finest details of what was going on in my family's lives. Was it that realization that led you to becoming a chaplain?
I think definitely, because that same realization, the fact that we can have an ongoing, all the time, intimate relationship with the creator of the universe and conversation with him all the time.
Absolutely.
I hope that influences a whole bunch of stuff that I do, and I'm sure it did. It influenced wanting to become a chaplain for sure. It was just a great opportunity and kind of an easy, nice fit.
Are you still a chaplain?
No, I am not. I left the fire department in the end of 2006, and I did coordinate their chaplains program. So I hung around for a while after that, still participated and responded when they needed someone a few times. But nope, I'm not officially a chaplain anymore.
I see from your website that you're contributing $1 from every copy of a journey sold to Medical Teams International. So who are Medical Teams International?
They are what was once Northwest Medical Teams, now Medical Teams International. And that's the disaster relief organization that I participated with on those trips to Kurdistan and Sudan and Indonesia. They're headquartered out of Oregon, and they provide medical relief all over the world. And I think they did have, and I think they still have, the largest volunteer mobile dental care program in the country.
Right.
I think they started in about 79 by assisting Cambodian refugees trying to escape the Khmer Rouge. Wonderful, wonderful organization.
I must admit, I did take a sneaky look at Medical Teams International website, and I love the wording regarding how they heal. I'm going to read it out loud because it's really struck me. Our goal is to save lives, but the people we serve are more than patients. They have names, stories and values. We are called to provide loving care. That means sitting with refugees, mothers and children in their emotional pain as we treat their physical pain, offering comfort and compassion amid grief and loss. I think that's wonderful. Amidst huge amounts of pain and suffering, I think it can be quite easy to forget that they are individuals rather than numbers. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what you just read about those guys really is their heart. That's what I experienced. That's really how, they do their work in just a loving way, and it's for each individual patient. Yeah, I thoroughly agree.
You've settled in the Pacific Northwest after all your travels. What drew you there in particular after seeing so much of the world?
Well, I grew up in Washington State in the Northwest, so I
Okay.
knew already how beautiful it is.
Mm.
Um, and then here, well, we took a job on this side of the mountains. Carol and I, we had been living in Eastern Washington several years ago, but took a job over here, and it happened to be in, this wonderfully beautiful area of
Mm.
this really wonderful Great Northwest. So we've just sort of stayed, and and I had quite a lot of family here. That was also the case. Now that's really thinned out.
Mm.
But yeah, beautiful place to live for sure.
You have some wonderful reviews for a journey, an attempt and sometimes struggle at being real in this world, of which you must be very proud, including what an interesting story about a kind man navigating a tumultuous world, and great story of finding self and finding God. If you could just change one thing in the story of your hugely fascinating life, Tim, what would it be?
You know, you asked me this the first time we had a chance to chat, and
Well, I'm
I
asking again for people who might not have heard
I
the
don't
first
know. I
time.
appreciate that, and I've had a chance to think about how I answered you the first time,
Yeah.
because it really is. you know, I think I'd answer kind of the same way if I remember correctly. Um, I'm so sorry for some bad decisions and that I've made in my life, and that probably have affected others. I'm sure it has, but I'm so sorry for that. But everything, all our decisions and everything, is kind of led up to today and to
Mm.
where we're at today. And I love today. So, and there's so many bad and wrong decisions. If I change one, I'd probably set into motion some horrible thing that who knows what would happen. So
Exactly.
I think I'm just very grateful for the moment.
Oh, that's wonderful. That really is wonderful. Where can Book Talk Radio Club listeners purchase a journey?
Well, of course, on Amazon or Book Depository, which I think is probably owned by Amazon, but
Mm.
they ship all over the place for free, I think, or they used to.
Right.
Barnes and Noble, ebooks on Google Play and iTunes. And if a person were to go to ajourneyofthebook.com, that's a website, and it has links to all those places, and it has links to YouTube, so you could see kind of a poor quality audio video version of a journey. And there's a little blog on there that's called Random Thoughts. Um, but yeah, for any of those places.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim. That was great. Please come back on Book Talk Radio Club again. I'd love to chat with you and hear more. In the meantime, good luck for the future. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Book Talk Radio Club. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you, Claire.
My pleasure. Bye now.